and Glory Spartacus. Fire and Glory is a strategy game available for free on Android and iOS. Build your empire and destroy your enemies on your way to strategic glory. Get your own resources or pillage your neighbors on the path to building your epic kingdom. 20 different buildings with 30 levels of upgrades each add something new to your economy, army and heroes. Hundreds of alliances fight for dominance, and many real-world friendships were born first in alliances in Fire and Glory. The game also has awesome RPG elements, as every player has a hero who leads their army in battle, and this hero can be customized and equipped with legendary items. Each Fire and Glory army is unique, as every player creates a different kingdom and employs different strategies, a classic example of easy to learn but difficult to master. The best thing is that the game is constantly giving players new events to try their mettle, so you'll never get bored. Support our channel by downloading Fire and Glory Spartacus from the link in the description for free and get a reward. Sa'd's army was eager to pursue Yazdegerd across the mountains. However, Umar's refusal halted any further eastward expansion for the time being. At the Caliph's command, Sa'd began combing Iraq for a place where he could establish a permanent military garrison. Eventually, after receiving guidance from the locals, Sa'd found a promising area of land in Siristan, where the land is both dry, well-watered, and is overgrown with thistles, and constructed a colony that would eventually grow into the city of Kufa. Far to the southeast, another Arab raiding force of 800, led by Utbah bin Ghazwan, began searching for a base of their own, and came across an arid area covered in rocks, and it was there that Utbah began work on a settlement which eventually developed into modern Basra. It seemed as though the frontier between the Caliphate and the Sassanid Empire would calcify at the Zagros Mountains, allowing Sa'd and Umar a brief time to consider administrative questions. However, the post-Jalula status quo wouldn't last for long. Unwilling to accept the permanent loss of their Mesopotamian heartland due to haughty imperial pride, the Sassanids continued backing military action against the Caliphate led by Hormuzan, head of one of Persia's premier families. During the retreat from Qadisiyah, Hormuzan had split off from the main column with his personal levy of survivors, and marched back to his estates in Khuzestan. This territory formed a vulnerable bulge, being the only remaining imperial Sassanid territory west of the Zagros Mountains. With little chance of resisting a concerted Muslim invasion of his lands, Hormuzan decided to go on the attack. From a forward base at the greatest city of his province, Awaz, the Persian general began launching quick raids into the area of Maysan in 638. As these attacks increased in frequency, Hormuzan established 2 additional bases even further west near Manazir. Utbah was unable to deal with the Persian attacks with his mere 800 troops, and appealed to Sa'd for aid. In response, the commander-in-chief ordered Numan bin Mukarin with a few thousand warriors to bolster Utbah's strength. The combined Muslim force launched a lightning campaign that defeated Hormuzan's army in its forward bases and pushed the frontier east to the Karen River. Suitably chastened by the reverses his soldiers had suffered, the Persian general concluded an unstable peace with his 2 Muslim counterparts, claiming to submit to the Caliph's suzerainty. The remainder of 638 passed without further warfare on the Persian front, except for a single act elsewhere, the so-called Fiasco of Fars. One of Sa'd's generals and governor of the uneventful province of Bahrain, Ullah bin al-Hadrami, sought to increase his own status and launched a reckless amphibious assault across the Persian Gulf. Landing on the coast of Fars, the Arab force headed towards Persepolis, managing to defeat a small militia in a costly battle before being surrounded and trapped by the Sassanids. The naval warfare-despising Caliph found out what Hadrami had done and was furious, but nevertheless sent Utbah to rescue the beleaguered governor, after which he was dismissed from his position. Hormuzan used the respite granted by his truce with the Muslims to levy more soldiers, and in that time also received imperial reinforcements from Hulwan. Now reinforced, he took advantage of the treaty's unclear boundary terms as an excuse to reinitiate hostilities in early 639. The new governor of Basra, Abu Musa, was aware of his caliph's command to avoid taking any further Persian territory, so he wrote to Umar explaining the situation and asking for guidance. Umar responded with an order to take Awaz and stop Hormuzdan's attacks. This prompted Musa to march his forces to the river Karen and face off against the Persian lord across its breadth. Feeling confident about his chances, Hormuzdan invited the Arab army across the river with the aim of facing and crushing it in a pitched battle. Musa gladly accepted, crossing by a bridge north of the city, defeating the Sassanid provincial force in a grueling fight and forcing Hormuzdan into flight to Ram Hormuz. A typically aggressive pursuit force of Arab cavalry forced the overwhelmed Persian commander to retreat even further east. From a strong position behind yet another river, Hormuzdan parleyed for peace with the Muslims, offering to recognize their conquest of Awaz while retaining a remnant of his own district. Still, the Sassanid reinforcements were pouring into northern Khuzestan in such large numbers that the preparations for another military campaign could no longer be kept secret. At this point, Sa'd was replaced as governor at Kufa by Ammar bin Yasir, who sent troops to Musa to subdue the Persian threat without delay. From Awaz, Musa launched his thrust against Hormuzdan's forces at Ram Hormuz, defeated them in a brisk engagement, and subsequently captured most of eastern Khuzestan. Hormuzdan retreated north to the Sassanid concentration point at Shushtar, a highly fortified, walled city in the Zagros foothills. Unsure about his ability to take on such a stronghold with his current strength, Musa had 1,000 fresh warriors sent to him from Kufa. With these additional warriors, Musa advanced north, captured Shushtar and Hormuzdan along with it, followed relatively quickly by the truly ancient city of Susa. Returning to Basra after this victory, Musa sent a subordinate to capture the final garrison in Khuzestan. This was Junde Shapur, who succeeded by late 641. With the seizure of this final city, all of Khuzestan and Sassanid territory west of the Zagros was now under Muslim rule. Despite the loss of Iraq, Sassanid Persia east of the Rocky Barrier was still a cohesive and powerful empire, with loyal territories as far off as India. After the fall of Khuzestan to Musa's army, Yazdegerd dispatched urgent orders to all of his remaining provinces to raise troops and send them to Nahavand, a city on the primary transportation artery west. Throughout the later part of 641, contingents from cities across Iran and beyond, such as Isfahan, Ray and Hamadan, and many others, arrived at Nahavand, until at the turn of 642, an army of around 60,000 had come together. At the same time, this fearsome force was Yazdegerd's final chance to turn the war in his favor. If he lost now, he would lose everything. A Sassanid general named Madan Shah was appointed to lead the army, who quickly warned the men that Umar is coming for you if you do not go for him. He has already destroyed the seat of your empire and plunged into the land of your emperor. A Persian frontier commander in service to the Caliphate noticed this massive military buildup and, alarmed, sent word to Ammar bin Yasir in Kufa, who immediately forwarded the information to Umar. Addressing the people of Medina on the issue, the Caliph's pronouncement that this is the day on which the future depends left no doubt as to the importance of the upcoming clash. The ever-active Caliph declared his intention to oversee the battle, but was talked out of it by his advisors, who pointed out that this was unnecessary. A more contentious issue was the assignment of military resources. Uthman wanted the whole army of the Caliphate concentrated, but Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib, disagreed, reminding Uthman that depriving the other frontiers would just invite the Byzantines, Ethiopians and others to retake their old provinces. Instead, he suggested the troops at Kufa, Basra and along the Persian border form the core of a field army supplemented by a fresh levy of raw recruits and veterans from Arabia. Umar concurred with Ali and gave command of the preemptive strike to the veteran of Qadisiyah and conqueror of Susa, Numan bin Muqarrin. Upon enthusiastically receiving the Caliph's decree, Numan assembled his troops, marched east from Kufa, and crossed the Tigris, rendezvousing with a number of other frontier units along the way. Trekking northeast from Ctesiphon along the Diyala River, the Muslims pivoted at Qasr Shirin and drove into the Zagros Mountains, eventually reaching a concentration point at Tazar in December 641. With 30,000 Muslim warriors assembled, Numan sent a scouting detachment into the Nahavand valley to establish where exactly the Persians were. By nightfall it returned, having observed little to no sign of Sassanid activity in the rocky uneven terrain between Tazar and the Persian base. Numan immediately seized the opportunity and decamped, marching his entire army to a small town known as Isbizahan, just 10 miles northwest of Nahavand itself and its Persian occupants. When, not long after, Madan Shah learned that the invader was closing in, he responded by bringing the entirety of his own army out of the city. In preparation for the final battle, he deployed Sassanid Persia's Great Retribution Field Force in an L-shaped hook formation, wrapped around a high terrain feature known as the Brown Ridge. While his soldiers advantageously faced down the slope, Madan Shah himself took up a position atop the heights, where the Imperial commander had a brilliant view of the entire area. This adroitly selected defensive position had multiple terrain features amplifying its strength. In front of the Sassanid line was a small stream, along the bank of which Madan Shah placed a minefield of cavalry crippling caltrops. Furthermore, his right, the short edge of the reverse L formation, was anchored on a fortified village and the 3,000-foot-high Ardashan Ridge, while the longer southeast-facing left flank was protected by a fork in the stream. Confronted by this natural fortress, and with few other options, Numan drew up his warriors along Madan Shah's entire front, just across the stream and facing up the slope. The Muslim general's brother, Nu'aym, led the L's short section. Hudayfa bin al-Yaman commanded the right, and Kaka bin Amr headed the Caliphate's cavalry reserve. Numan himself was in the center. The Caliphate's deployment gave Madan Shah a potential opportunity to launch a preemptive assault at the unprepared Muslim lines. However, either due to overconfidence in his prepared fortifications, or cautious of leaving them due to the previous defeat at Jalula, the Empire's field commander remained where he was, allowing Numan to finish bringing his forces up. This inaction likely did not seem like a blunder. The Muslims were far away from their bases in Iraq, and could either smash their heads against the dangerous Persian fortifications, or wait, chew through their supplies, and retreat in deadly conditions. An hour after the Islamic noon prayer, as the sun reached its highest point in the sky, the entire Muslim army began its attack straight at Madan Shah's defensive belt. Upon reaching the Wadi stream, the attackers' infantry and cavalry alike were met with a deadly rain of Persian arrows, loosed by archers who had the luxury of shooting downhill. Worse still, Kaka's horsemen galloped headlong into the caltrops, leading to the maiming and immobilization of many horses. Nevertheless, Numan's men pushed on across the entire front, weakened all the way by arrow fire. Then, charging uphill, the Muslims crashed into the Sassanid ranks, and the two sides met in ferocious melee combat. A grinding clash of attrition began with little room for flair or tactical brilliance, only numerical weight, personal prowess, strength, and discipline. On some sections of the line, perhaps those under Nu'aym's command, where the slope was more gradual, the Muslims managed to temporarily push Madan Shah's soldiers back, but each time were counterattacked and shoved to their original positions by the Persians. In other areas, near Zaramin, where the slope was steepest, the Persians even managed to haul the Caliphate's forces back across the wadi, but they in turn counterattacked and fought back to where they were. The battle's outcome rested on a knife edge, with dead and dying of both sides littering the field, either laying still or shouting in terrible agony. This mass slaying continued until nightfall, when the Muslims, with no prospect of breaking the Persian line that night, pulled away and withdrew to their camp. The night hours passed without contact, with both sides recovering their fallen comrades and tending to the wounded. When dawn broke on the second day, however, Numan formed his army up and, somewhat inexplicably, launched another frontal assault across the stream, lasting all day. After what historian Akram poetically described as a tragic harvest of death, the Muslims again retreated, unsuccessful and badly bloodied. Both armies formed up again at dawn on the third day, but a mixture of the horror, tactical sanity, and possible mutiny kept the Muslim general from attempting his human wave assault for a third time. Instead, he waited for the Persians to emerge from their fortifications and launch an attack of their own. But Madan Shah was a wily commander, aware that time was his champion, and refused to budge. After a tense 2-day standoff, the Sassanid regimental commanders began raiding the Muslim line with small contingents. These limited attacks would inflict damage on personnel and supplies, before swiftly pulling back behind their defences, leaving the Islamic forces frustrated. While constant assailment and the cold conditions struck blow after blow to Muslim morale and strength, Madan Shah began absorbing a steady stream of reinforcements and provisions from nearby Hamadan. The situation could not continue as it stood, and so Numan called a council of war only a few days after his previous attack. The eldest companion present advised that the Muslims ought not to attack at all, and to merely destroy those raiding parties which came to attack them. As all the officers were eager to get stuck in properly, this proposal was met with disapproval. Another more gung-ho leader suggested that the frontal attacks actually be resumed, regardless of consequence. This too was quickly shot down. Then spoke Taleha bin Kuluwayd, a former enemy of Islam and one of the architects of Jalula, who put forward a clever stratagem. The Muslims, he said, should put the cavalry in a position to outflank them and show a weak front, making as if to withdraw. Let the Persians hope for victory and advance against us. Then we turn and fight them. This plan was approved by most of those present and put into motion. With the purpose of making the illusion of weakness more convincing, at Taleha's proposal, the Muslims also began circulating false rumors that Caliph Umar was dead. Over the next few days, word of Umar's death proliferated around the overjoyed Persian army like a kind of virulent mental plague, provoking hopes of an offensive against their now surely demoralized enemy. The Friday after Numan's last attack, Sassanid sentries began observing the abandonment of Muslim positions across the stream, tents being pulled down in the Muslim camp, baggage being loaded, and small contingents of men marching west. Everything Madan Shah could see appeared to suggest that the invading army was vulnerable and was about to retreat. So the general opened a series of gaps in the Caltrip belt on his right flank, according to a pre-prepared plan, and began having his soldiers cross to the outside. Lead elements halted just beyond the Caltrip field, waiting for the rear ranks, and began forming up there. According to our sources, Madan Shah might have restored the Caltrip field so his troops could not run. The retreating Muslim infantry span around upon seeing that they were about to be struck from behind and hastily deployed for battle, somewhat further back than before. Of course, this was all part of Taleha's plan. The Persian general had swallowed the bait, hook, line and sinker. Unbeknownst to the Sassanid army, Kaka and his cavalrymen were concealed in a gap behind the Ardashan ridge, ready to attack. 2 hours before noon, Madan Shah ordered his army to advance slowly towards the stationary enemy line. When the Persians entered missile range, they began loosing arrow volleys, with the aim of softening the Muslims up at a greater range than Arab bows could operate at. Forced to defend themselves with only their shields, many of the Caliphate's warriors were chomping at the bit to close with the Sassanids and fight them in melee, but Numan, with a wider view of the strategic situation, ordered them to remain steady. After a while weakening the Muslims with missile fire, Madan Shah launched a full-on charge. This was the key moment of the battle, as this attack finally unanchored the Imperial right flank from the Ardashan Ridge and its nearby fortified village. Remaining on the defensive, Numan restrained his forces from effectively pushing back, withdrawing slowly in a similar manner to Hannibal's center at Cannae. Then, after some time of suffering this, Numan ordered a counterattack just after midday, and at the same time, Kaka's cavalry swept out from behind the ridge and drove a wedge between the Persians and their obstacles. However, Madan Shah detached a unit of reserves that met and held the Muslim cavalry before the encirclement was completed. On the front line, Persian forces were gradually pushed back under the weight of Numan's counterattack. But then, the Muslim general was struck by an arrow, fell from his horse, and was spirited away from the fight, with Nuaym impersonating him to maintain morale. Although Sassanid resistance was absolutely unwavering, by late afternoon, the Muslim forces, half encircling their foe, were clearly in the superior position. Suddenly, as the sky began to darken, the majority of Madan Shah's army collapsed and routed, able to do so because the forces opposing Kaka were still resisting. Amidst this chaos, Taleha was also slain. A relatively large number of Persian troops managed to escape the battlefield, but many, including Madan Shah, were killed by their Muslim pursuers, fell victim to the re-strengthened Caltrop belt, or were taken prisoner. Hudayfa took command of the Caliphate's army after Numan's death, and advanced the following morning, defeating the Sassanid remnant at Darazid. Part of the defeated army retreated into Nahavand itself after the second defeat, where the new imperial commander, Dinar, surrendered the city unconditionally. Nahavand was the final great battle between Islam and Persia, marking the point at which there was no longer any doubt: the Sassanid Empire would fall. For this, Nahavand is known to the Muslims as the victory of victories. It would take another decade to subdue all of the far-flung Persian territories in Central Asia and Eastern Iran, but by late